Previously on Stay in Your Lane, we've got Jeff Potts, AutoScheduler.
So started out on the warehousing side of the business, managing warehouses, both cold storage as well as dry storage operations. Supply chain has changed a lot over the last 20 years. There's a lot more complexity to the supply chain today. There's a lot more speed and velocity in supply chains today. And so, the old ways of kind of trying to fake it till you make it, or just kind of working hard to try to come up with an outcome, just doesn't work very well in today's environment.
No, it won't work. And with software, well, you see at the conference, a lot of software presence.
Right.
Where years and years ago, very little. Now our industry's seeing huge influx of software presence.
Right. Yeah, and I think everybody's trying to figure out, how do you be as efficient as you can with the assets that you deploy on a day-to-day basis. And what's interesting for me is coming from the TMS world for, a lot of years and now more into the warehousing distribution world is, really seeing the convergence of the warehouse and the transportation side of the business. Because I think for a lot of years, they were kind of siloed operations.
Yep.
You had warehousing and distribution, and then you had transportation, and they each had their kind of area of responsibility. But when you start looking at the supply chain in totality and saying, how are you going to continue to drive value? You really need to have that connected supply chain between the warehouse and the transportation. So if you're getting into a building, and it's a third party carrier, dwell time is a big deal, right? If you can get turned in 30 minutes or an hour versus in 8 hours, there's a big difference probably of what that particular receiver or shipper is going to pay on transportation rates versus somebody that can, turn a truck in 30 minutes to an hour kind of a thing. So
well, yeah, definitely. I think when anywhere you can knock down the silos,
right,
and bring everybody operating and rowing together, you're driving value.
Right. Yeah. So, that's what part of what we look at. We say, how do you, as this particular site running a warehouse, how do you become a, quote, shipper of choice, right? How do you make sure that you're turning those carrier assets as quickly as possible? How do you sequence your inbounds and your outbounds in such a way where you're maximizing your fill rates to your customers and your on-time rates to your customers? How do you do best door assignment, which seems kind of like, okay, what is that? But
makes a difference.
Yeah. I mean, most yard management systems out there in the marketplace today, they have no clue as to what's on the inside of the building, right? And so they're basically assigning doors in a vacuum. And really, to do door assignment well, you need to know what's on that trailer or what will be going on that trailer in relationship to where's that inventory in a building. And, a lot of these buildings are million and a half square foot buildings, so a wrong door assignment can take, the difference between 3 hours and 30 minutes for loading, depending on where that inventory is sitting in the building. Right. I mean, you came from Nestle. They ran a lot of very large, big box.
A lot of big boxes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, when I was there, it was a homegrown warehouse management system.
Right.
We did, and which had to communicate with the various TMSs. With Nestle, we started with McHugh, which became Red Prairie, and eventually they went to SAP TM. Along the way, but yeah, I mean, they talk about silos. That's your typical silos right there.
Right. Yeah.
I think our industry is evolving, and those that understand where that value and efficiency comes from and how to knock down the silos and how to bring everything together. Previously, it would depend on people's communication.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Bob calls Charlie out in the warehouse, right?
Right.
All right. And then we added technology. Now he emails him. Wow, this became so much more efficient, right?
Yeah.
So you get it down to, I think the level that you guys are operating and what value you can bring to people's networks. You're shaving hours and hours and hours of forklifts running and of trucks waiting.
Yeah.
Driving that efficiency. And when you have a warehouse that runs on partially or totally automated, then that matters also, because those systems become less efficient once they hit about 75 to 80% capacity.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and on the labor side too, I mean, the warehouses have the same issues that the trucking industry has had for a lot of years, is turnover, right? And you go into a lot of these big warehouses, and 50% turnover a year is a good metric. A lot of them are running 100%, 120, 130% turnover per year, and that's like a lot of carriers for a lot of years as well, right? And so when you have that level of turnover of people, it's hard to be able to, retain the knowledge of kind of what's going on and be able to leverage,
There's no tribal wisdom.
There's no tribal wisdom, and so you really do need to rely more heavily on systems that are really looking at all the constraints and all the variables and saying, okay, for the next 24 to 48 hours, what are we going to do based on, how many people showed up for work today? How many, trucks
What
are
are
in
the
the
priorities?
yard, sitting in the yard? How many am I anticipating coming in from, the data from Four Kites or P44? How many orders am I going to get dropped from, ERP system today that I have to fulfill? And it's, you look at it, and it's a big, very complex math problem at the end of the day.
Right. You can't do that math problem throughout the day with one person,
right,
and get them all the information at the time they need it, and then wait for them to do that type of an equation.
Right. Exactly.
And it to be consistent.
Right. Yeah. And because it's going to constantly change throughout the day as well.
Right.
So, yeah.
I had a question, Jeff, on if I was a Michigan State University logistics major right now, and I was graduating, let's say in May. I've been reading a lot in the journals, on the internet about, AI. Should I be worried about AI taking maybe the job I thought I was going to have? Or I guess I'm trying to say is, I'm sure I know your company works a lot with AI, and I'm just trying to think, as a logistics graduate in 2024, how should I be looking at AI? Should I be worried? Should I be embracing it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would embrace it, because I think there's a lot of, kind of misnomers of what AI is going to do. I mean, at the end of the day, really what AI is doing in many cases is it's solving complex problems and then learning through that solving process, right? So, when you start talking about constraint-based optimization, well, that's been around for a lot of years, right? And really, like the way we think about AI is you're solving this very complex problem, but even your constraint-based optimization, based on the variables and the nuances of that operation and how they handle things, may not get it perfectly initially, right? And so you have to constantly be learning, okay, we produced this result and it yielded X, right? And maybe X wasn't exactly what you wanted. And so you kind of have to relearn and say, okay, how do you tweak that optimization constraint?
That becomes the generative AI.
That becomes the generative AI to get it better and better and better over time. And so, I don't look at AI as, it's going to replace people's jobs or anything like that, but it's going to take a lot of, very difficult tasks, and also kind of mundane tasks in many ways, and being able to really automate those and make better decisions that's going to drive greater value. And then you as an individual, you can be focusing on your more strategic things. So I think it's here to stay. I think in our industry, there's still a lot of places where, we're not operating as well as we should be as an industry, right? And so I think
it's going to expose it.
Yeah. So I think we need to continue to say, okay, how do we leverage some of these new tools to help, drive to that next level of efficiency?
Oh, I think that's a great description of what the way you see it. Thomas and I spoke, and Keith. The goal isn't to necessarily replace people. but the people that are freed up reallocate them in a value role for the organization, and then everyone wins.
Right.
So
Yeah, exactly.
if you're to answer your question, Joe, I think, you say embrace it is what I heard.
Right.
And I would agree with that. And then I also think that the people that are successful from a technology perspective nowadays, because we've seen some in our industry come in and leave, right? We've seen a full cycle, I would say, by this point, of the latest technology come in, and we've seen those leave that either it really didn't work, but it was technology and it was something that the others were hoping would catch on. I think if you look at AutoScheduler, it's no question whether it works. The question is, if you're an organization that is ready to utilize it, or maybe large enough to understand it and utilize it and then apply it. But at the end of the day, Joe, give me your thoughts. I think those will be successful from a technology perspective that actually put technology out there and get the people working with it side fixed.
Yeah, absolutely. At the end of the day, I think it's still a people business. I mean, you gotta have those relationships. I've been out of the day-to-day operations for a number of years now, and I know the new crop of people that have been hired. I mean, they're very more comfortable, be working in a digital environment, social media. So dinosaurs like we've got to migrate that way, but you still have to have a contact. You can't do it all through email. You can't do it, all through an automated bid. I mean, it's got to be, you got to sit down and go through the nuts and bolts of the business. So you got to have both. You can't have one.
And I think we've seen that, one's not going to cut it, and both is better for everyone.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah.
So as far as FSA, how many of these conferences have you been to?
More than I could probably dare to admit. So I started going to, I think the first conference I went to was probably 1985.
Okay.
And I was on the third-party logistics side of the business then. And what's changed was back then, you probably remember this too, Joe, it was by invitation only if you were not a shipper to be here. So
shipper had to invite their supplier.
So it was you felt very honored to be here because you were in a very, very kind of elite group of providers. Right. And the ratio of shippers to, 3PLs or carriers was, very much stacked in the shippers' favor. And so obviously that's changed a lot over the years.
Right.
And, and I think that's good. But that was the way it was back then.
Maybe the golden years.
Well, I even go back further. I remember when the FSA was known as the Canned Goods Shippers Association. That's how far back I go.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I've always found value from the conference, and the value's in the people.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. In today's world, we're all busy, right? We're all running 100 miles an hour every day, and you don't oftentimes get the opportunity to just network with people that you've, developed relationships with over the years. And so it's things like this where you bring a lot of people together. You spend, 2 days, 3 days of intense time together and networking, and you get as much, I think, from these types of conferences just through the networking. I mean, you have to have good content in the presentations, and that's obviously there as well. But I think the networking piece is very, very valuable.
Continue watching on the next episode of the Stay in Your Lane podcast.